Yeah, it was crazy. I thought this was gonna be part two. I already recorded part one. It was like 25 minutes, and as it was uploading, I wait the whole time, hour, and everything, and then it got to processing, and when it was processing, I was like, I ain't gonna wait anymore. I need to delete my first video so I can make part two. Because who knows how long it's be processed? What if they wanted to review it because they don't like what I'm saying and they gonna keep it for as long as, and then I never got to record part two. So for part one, I had gone through um, Numbers 11:5 compared to Luke 11 to talk about the 70. I went through Numbers 11:16 all the way to Luke 10 and Exodus 18. It was Numbers 11 and 16, Luke 1 or Luke 10 and 1. Gone to Exodus 18 and 7, Numbers 10 and 30. And I got to Numbers 11:25, and uh, I ran out of space. So here we are at Numbers 11:25, and say, and the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke unto him, and took the spirit that was upon him and put it on the 70 elders. So that's when we go to John chapter 20. I mean, I'm not saying it's the same thing, but oh yeah, while I'm at it, I went to what I was talking about in the last video. If I ever do get to upload it, because I think when it was processing and I deleted it, it's gone for good. But I don't know. Maybe I'll get that in. But I had said, with Hebrews 12, verse 21, I couldn't remember the exact verse, but it's verse 21 that the people trembled, and I showed it in Exodus. What was that, 15 or 21 or whatever? Right after the so-called Ten Commandments was given, the people trembled, and I said, "Oh, Paul mentioned that, or the so-called Paul, the writer of Hebrews or whatever." But it actually says that Moses in verse 21, it was Moses that feared, and he feared what he's gonna do to them. And we're gonna get into that in this video when we talk about uh, what they're gonna do to the Canaanites, and that was gonna be a sign when we talk about Exodus. The basically, all the terrible things they would do to them would be a sign. And so that gets into what I've been getting at the whole time with the Last Supper and Numbers 14 and 9. So I wanted to pick it up from none other than 1 Corinthians 10 and 11. I know I touched on this in a video about a year ago, or a little less than. And so 1 Corinthians 10 and 11 say, now all these things happen to them for ensamples. Actually, let's go from the KJV. It say, and do not. So yeah. This is. Let me roll it back a little bit. They talk about all these people killed by snakes and stuff, and you know how. When I would talked about Luke 10 and 1, I think it was, and Numbers 11:16, he'd ask for a fish, and we're given the snake, and that's what happened to Numbers, all the bad parts of Numbers, right? So, all these people had died, and like I said, I want to get into the Nehushtan and John 3:14 and all that, but and Isaiah 14, um, the bright morning star, Jesus and everything, but that's for another time. Um, and we could get into the image and all that from Second Corinthians and 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 4 and Colossians 1 verse 17 or whatever, I don't remember, verse 15. So and they grumbled. This is Numbers 11 for sure. The grumbling, that's very heavy in Numbers 11, and how Numbers 11 they were all destroyed. The ones that wanted the meat. They ate all the meat. There was all these quails, and everybody ate the meat. Jesus said, "What kind of father would somebody ask for a fish give him a snake?" And so, verse 11 here, it says, "These things happen to them as ensamples uh, and written down as warnings for us." So it was really for this generation that they were, uh, that generation, if I was to put myself in the context, it was that generation there. Said, "These things are written down for warnings for us, on whom the fulfillment of the ages has come." And I'll have to take their word for it. I'm not that good at Hebrew or Greek to know whether or not it's true that Onun, Aeonun, or whatever, Aeonin is plural, the eons, whether Aeonin means eons, these ages, but it says that it come to whom, they're talking about this letter to the Corinthians, these first century Christians, that the fulfillment of the ages has come. So it really was on that generation. And no, not that race of people is how you interpret generation, which is crazy. But why didn't I finish where I was left off? I was there for a reason. Okay, so John 20. It's a. I want to show you John 20, which you already seen. Verse 21 from the KJV. Then Jesus said to them, "Peace be unto you, as my Father sent me, I send you." And when he had said these, he breathed on them, and they said to him, "Receive the Holy Ghost." So that's really interesting because John is not Luke, so he might have a different, in Luke, so he might have a different way of the process which they got the Holy Spirit. Not saying that they fully got it at this point, according to John, but the end of um, Mark seems to incorporate Luke, John, and uh, Matthew's accounts into the end. So even though it's the first written gospel, presumably the ending is the last written. So it's a right here when he breathed on them. But this is in terms of we just read about Moses, how he breathed on them in Numbers 11 to the 70. Then Luke had talked about the 70. So this is supposed to be an ensample to you that the Old Testament is a shadow of something that was going to come. There wasn't the importance of it isn't we're supposed to not supposed to be like, oh yeah, that's crazy how they died in the desert or something. Like I don't even know what kind of lesson you would glean from all the horrible things that happened in the middle of Numbers, and you weren't even supposed to number Israel anyways. And then in Leviticus they say, or sorry, the Levites in Numbers chapter 1 or 2, they were like, we didn't number the Levites. You weren't supposed to number any of them. Remember, Ezra had said Satan had made them, and it's interesting when you look at John how he talked about there was a number of the people who had been saved in Revelation chapter 14 and chapter 7. But in chapter 7, he said he had heard from the elders, the same elders that were talking about the Lion of Judah. He had heard, and that's the ones of the old, the prophets and all that. I'm not saying the elders are the prophets, but you can think about the old way and everything, and who would be renowned in that time. Not men of renown or anything. I'm not meaning that. But it's say that they got the spirit breathed on them, and it's just really interesting because um when Moses breathed the spirit on the 70, Jesus, he's got disciples, and it wasn't the same time that Luke and then John, two different witnesses or whatever, but it's a and when he had said these things, he breathed on them, and they received the Holy Ghost. And whosoever sins ye remit, they are remitted unto them. And whoever sins ye retain, they are retained. So that's those judges. Remember Jethro, and that was really interesting because Jethro is the son of Abraham, and his son is the Rechabites. And, between there is Joab, who had decided to never drink again because of everything he had done. I think it was Joab. Everything he had done to help Ammon, get his sister and destroy her life and everything. So he had decided to never drink again. So that was really interesting. And Jobab is actually Hobab. We see that's when we went through Numbers and went all around there. And Jobab is Job from the book of Job. So, these 70 judges, the disciples, you say he's going to give them 12 seats and everything, then they're going to judge and then you read Revelation, it's actually 24 seats they got. And, so it's okay, we're done with John. I wanted to move it on. I don't have much time. I'm halfway done before I run out of time, before the video runs out of space. I don't know if I ever got you on that first video. But if we go to Numbers 11:29, this stuff is super interesting. This is awesome right here. It says, "And Moses said unto him, Art thou jealous for my sake? Would that the Lord's peoples and prophets, that the Lord would put his spirit upon them." So Moses, all these people, they trembled, they were fearful when they had to hear directly from God. When it was simple, just 10, and the law, when it comes to all the sacrifice, that had to do with the 10 and the 613, or however you look at it. It's part and parcel. It's the same as when you sin. The sacrifice is part of that. So the 10 Commandments is the law. It's a summary of the law. So here Moses in 11:29 of Numbers, he said the Spirit come upon all of them. All of them. He said he would. Well, look at Acts 2. That's the whole point of this we get into is Acts 2. He said, that he put the Spirit on all of them. It's amazing. So Moses, because they were bitter that these people were prophesizing, not like prophesizing in terms of future, but like Acts 2, they could just speak in such a way that it was like it was clear that they were full of the Spirit. And they didn't even have to be there. Like there was a couple that was gone and didn't even wasn't even around at the time, and they still got it, because it was in the 70. And if you go through some of my videos from a year ago, the sons of light and the sons of darkness, I talk about the 70 children that went down to Egypt, and the 70 nations, and how the Sanhedrin, about the Kahal Gadol and all that, and how they was going to inherit them all in the Sanhedrin. I mean, this stuff crazy. So if we go to Numbers 14 and 9, oh, let's not jump ahead of 14 and 9. I don't have time for Numbers 14 yet. So I'm still getting with the course. I'm going to go hit you with the Numbers 14. I'm going to hit you with the John 17. I'm going to hit you with the Acts 2. It's going to come in due time. I didn't do it by Pentecost. I'm sorry about that. But we're going to get there. And actually, we gonna touch on Numbers 14 already. We didn't play no more. It says, "Only rebel not against the Lord, neither fear ye the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their defense is removed from over them, and the Lord is with us, for fear them not." So if you look at Exodus 34:10, it talks about all the fearful things and terrible things that would be proof to them. Well, if you go to Exodus 25 and 16, he says he will give the law to put in the ark. And then, no, he didn't say 10. He said, and this is after the 10, and he broke them, and all that. And I think this is even after he had got the new ones or whatever. I think that was 24. So he's saying 25, he will give them the law. And then he goes on to talk about these terrible things, to do to these other people, that they're going to be bread. Well, that's not what Jesus said. He didn't say they're going to be your bread, or anything. He said, I'm your bread. The Messiah being bread, the Messiah being the lamb, the Messiah being the offering. I mean, is that really what had said directly? Only if the twist away, but they only heard as few as 10 verses, and maybe I forgot to check about that Hebrew in the Hebrew 20 and 1 and cross reference in the Septuagint. I got to do that for next video, but we're gonna get into X Numbers 14 for sure. But I want to show you a few things about how that wasn't really a time that was just a shadow. That what was really happening was in the time of Paul, and Paul being the most influential person of this whole story, because there's billions of Christians in the world. Billions of Christians in the world. How many Jewish and how many would there even have been if there had been no Christians? So, and even Muslims if there had been no Christians. Really, so I think it's really interesting that, we're going to get into all that, and how Numbers 14 it plays into John even, because if you go to John 8:59, John 8:59, I only got 7 minutes. John 8:59, it says, they took up stones to stone him. Well, that's the same thing they did to Moses in Numbers 14, because they couldn't hear the real deal. And so Jesus, being from the Lord, he given them the real deal. And they pick up rocks to stone him. So Moses, he had to, they had to cover his face. And, I think Michelangelo said it was because he had a horn or something. And, those phylacteries, that's the mark of the beast. The sign on the forehead and wrist and all that, and that's what they had. So if you cross-reference Nehemiah 10:31, they weren't, and Zechariah 14:20, they weren't supposed to have nothing like that. They weren't supposed to have people that didn't do nothing like that, is what I mean. Yeah. So what I wanted to peep real quick is in the New Testament. I'm gonna dedicate the rest of this to the New Testament, and that's about how this is about how when Paul was the relevant figure to all this happening. When you go to Second Corinthians, if you read the end of Acts or then Mark 16, all these things that they were going to happen to these disciples, and all that. And that's what happened to Paul. He was the one that got bit by the snake and didn't suffer. He healed all kinds of people. All the things he was going to do, Paul did. And so, 1 Corinthians 4. Sorry, it's so loud. I'm just getting nervous. I bounce around too much. Okay. My conscience is clear, but that does not make me innocent. It is the Lord who judges. Oh, 1 Corinthians. That's why. How did I jump so? Okay, that's why. I was in the wrong. I was in 1 Corinthians. I'm trying to be 2 Corinthians 4:4. I only got 4 minutes. 2 Corinthians 4:4. Sorry about how loud the page turning. In whom the God of this world hath blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine on them. The God of this age has blinded the minds of the believers. So it's the God of this age. It's not the God of this world. It's the God of this age who has blinded them. So this age is the age of Moses. Now, if you look at Romans 12:2, gotta plan ahead. I gotta put some markers in here, some sticky notes, so I can just turn right to it. Okay. I mean, I know where it is. I just do everything so poorly. All right. So 12:2, it says, and Jesus killed, and he killed James. That's X. Okay. Okay. 12:2. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed to the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect to God. Well, if you look at the Greek, it says, and be not comforted to this age, the eoni. And actually, that I thought that was the plural with an I. See, I don't know Greek at all. Do not be conformed to this age, the age of Moses, because it's passing away in the time of Paul. And when's it pass away? Not in the time of Jesus, in the time after Paul, the immediate thereafter of Paul, when the temple was destroyed, and whether or not he had been martyred in Rome or he's still living in Rome, it doesn't say. It's the end of the story. So if you go to Hebrews 9:26. That's how you know it's not a Pauline letter. It's into the Pauline letters, but it's so long. It should have been at the and being to the Hebrews. It should have been at the beginning. So they tell it on themselves. So it says, then Christ would have had to suffer many times since the creation of the world, but now he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to do away with sin by the sacrifice of himself. So the end of the ages is the end of the time of Moses. And his body is how it's understood in a lot of the New Testament being the end of it. But what happened after then is the temple, and it was written after then. So it's really his body is the temple, and the Christians are his body. And so they're living stones and all this, um they were dumb, all this. They didn't have the oracles, but he's building them up piece by piece. And he's even Jesus talked about the harvest. He told them to go out in these nations of the harvest. So the harvest is the end. You know, that's the last thing. And he was trying to get laborers and what have you. Um, until I run up space, I wanted to talk about where it was gonna go eventually. Is that the Lost Tribes? It looks like I'm running out of space, but when I get talked about X2, I want to talk about the Last Tribes. And a lot of people they have this perfect understanding that not all who are Israel, but they don't think any Gentile could ever be part of Israel, and that's just not true. I mean, X2 has proselytes. Uh, in numbers, they say, same rule for the foreigner, and people came out of Egypt and Ruth, and I mean the list goes on. I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, Dr. Brown needs to get with the program.